Y'all asked for it. What's up, guys? It's Joey. I have been asked for years at this point to make a tutorial about guitar tones. So we're going to talk about guitar tones today. If you don't know who I am, my name is Joey Bertram. I play guitar and produce music and post on the internet. This is my studio here in Nashville, Tennessee. So what I'm going to teach you today is more of a philosophy than anything. It's something that I want you to be able to think about and apply to your own process. I'm very against presets and things that are mix ready because everything is different, right? I think the reason that a lot of music today sounds very similar is because a lot of people drop on a plugin and hit a preset, and that's the sound that you get. But how I like to approach it is a thought process. What am I trying to achieve? What is the end goal? How can I get that end goal with what I have? And that's what I'm going to try to teach you today. There's a lot to cover in this, and I don't think that a 20, 30-minute YouTube video, I don't really know how long this is going to take, is going to cover it all. So this is something that I want to make into a series going forward, where each video is a little bit more focused on something specific, but this video is going to touch on everything a little bit. The whole process, what all's involved, how I think about stuff. Now, before we start, there's a couple of things that are common sense, but that I need to reiterate because they're really important. First off, your guitar has to be in tune. If your guitar is out of tune, your tone is ruined. Doesn't matter how good your tone is, it's going to suck because it's out of tune. This leads into the next point, which is making sure that your guitar is intonated and that you are playing intonated. Now, what do I mean by playing intonated? I mean that you can change the pitch of a note, whether your guitar is perfectly in tune and intonated or not, by pushing harder on the fret. So if you've got really strong hands and you push down, but your guitar is perfectly in tune, odds are you're going to play a little bit sharp. There's times where I'm in the studio and people push down really hard with their hands and we have to compensate for that. So I'll take a chord and make sure that each note of the chord is in tune. You got to make sure that the notes that you're playing, not just the strings, are in tune. Carrying over from that, you have to use good gear. And I don't mean that you have to have a super expensive guitar or a super expensive amp or a super expensive interface. I just mean that the gear that you have has to be in good condition. Your guitar has to be set up well. If you're playing a cheap guitar, it can sound great. Some of my favorite guitars that I have are really cheap, but you have to make sure that they're set up. If you're playing a guitar that isn't set up properly, it's not intonated, the pickup heights are different, things like that go a long way in making your tone good. And the point of all of this is making the most of the gear that you have. And the last piece is the most annoying, but you have to practice. You have to know what you're going to play. You have to make sure that the part that you're playing is serving what you're playing. I can't play guitar like Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain probably couldn't play guitar like me. There's times where I'm tracking something that needs to just be raw and aggressive and not super clean. And sometimes I can't do that because I've spent a lot of my time learning how to make sure that every note is super clean and open strings ring and there's lots of sustain. And sometimes that's not what the part calls for. You have to practice your technique and you have to practice your taste. If you just started playing guitar and you're trying to play like Polyphia, well, you're going to have to practice a lot more than if you're covering Smells Like Teen Spirit. These are the annoying basics that are common sense, but they're very, very, very important. So with those out of the way, let's actually talk about making good guitar tones. All right, first things first. The way that I see it, different amps have different sonic character. Certain amps distort more than others. A Fender Twin, for example, is a very clean sounding amp. The more that you turn it up, the more saturated it gets, but it never really fully distorts. It can, but not like a 5150. Cleaner tones are going to have less harmonics, less distortion, less overall compression. Distorted amps are going to add more saturation, more character, more noise, and more compression overall. Pickups are kind of the same way. The level that your guitar hits your amp is going to affect how it comes out. Because of that, the way that I approach my guitar tones is by layering different guitar tones on top of each other. So our clean guitar tone, less harmonics, more fundamental frequencies of notes, cleaner. We get more pick attack. You get more overall sound of the guitar naturally versus distorted tones, more noise, more energy, more character. And when you layer those two together, I think you get something really cool. If you get the perfect guitar tone with one guitar, like one tone on its own, that's awesome. But for me, I like to step it together, and I'll sometimes use, 2, 3, 4 different rhythm tracks, all working to do something to reach my final rhythm tone. So I'm going to pull up a couple examples of some guitar tones and show you how each sound kind of works together. All right, so this is the session for an older riff that I posted. We're just going to kind of skim through it a little bit. I'm going to play it. You get it. It's riff. This is an older one. I was using all plugins for this. So this will be a pretty good example of using plugins. So this is the first rhythm tone. This is the cleaner tone. And it's still dirty, but it's not as dirty as this second layer right here. Oh, this is so old. Slaps though. All right, so first tone, single coil guitars. I'm going to play just the DI of those tones. It's my telly. Very simple. Now in this tone, because I'm going lighter on distortion, I'm playing more open strings, open, ringy, sustain, and I'm playing more complex chord voicings. So I think I'm playing like a lot of 7s and 9s and like major extensions versus in the distorted one, I'm playing more like power chord shapes with less kind of sustained out. I think in this song, in this riff specifically, I am kind of hitting some open strings, but I'm using STL tonality, which is what I've used for forever. This is the Andy James tonality because it has an AC30, which I think is the perfect amp for that sort of breakup, but still kind of clean tone. I'm going to turn that on, and then I'm not using the cabinet from this. I am using a cabinet of my own in STL NADIR. The cabinet is right over there in the back. And I captured out the whole thing, and it sounds really sick. This is the tone by itself, just mono down the middle. Hearing this now, this is a little bit more dirty than I would typically go for. I'd go more for something like that. But there's nothing in front of this. It's just this plugin. There is a little bit of drive from this OD 808 Tube Screamer looking thing. Volume is getting boosted and there's a tiny bit of drive. If we go to the amp on the high setting, nothing has changed from stock. Looks like I'm clipping the output of the plugin, but I don't really think that that does anything. Now let's talk about cabinets really quick. I think that cabinets and speakers are almost, if not more important than the actual amp itself. And I feel like a lot of the time they've gotten better, but starting out with like these, this is an old plugin and the IRs kind of weren't that popping. This is my high gain tone. I'm using the Nembrini Audio Hardball plugin. I haven't used this in a while. And you can see that that is just pinned right there. Now this tone is humbuckers, so it's going to be not as spiky, a little bit more sustained. Like if you look right here, like look at these DIs versus these DIs are a little bit more consistent because the humbuckers have higher output. So that's kind of an example of using two tones to achieve one sound. We get string definition from here and we get noise and energy from here. And that's like an example of kind of my older sound. Let's pull up something a little bit more new. Here is the session for something that's a little bit newer. This is the song New Deal off the EP 419 by Kid Pastel. This is one of my favorite projects I've gotten to work on with some of my best friends. There's a lot going on in this mix. Let me play just the ending really quick. So it's kind of like arena rock, shoegazy, alt vibes. The same concept applies here. These are all real amps. So when we were doing the demo, DI'd and took tones from my Quad Cortex. This is the Quad Cortex tone. And then when we went back and retracked everything, we reamped those DIs through real amps, basically the real version of the amps that we were using when we demoed them. So this is the live AC30 with a microphone on it that we ended up using. So let's solo out that AC30 and kind of listen to it a little bit. Now, again, going off the philosophy, this first rhythm layer is going to be more of the sound of the guitar itself, a little bit less drivey and a little bit more note focused. And there's a blend of two microphones in there, 57 and a Fathead ribbon microphone, but not a lot of the Fatheads getting used. Down here, we have the heavier rhythm tone, which is my 6505. And that sounds like this. And again, the voicings are different. This is playing power chords. The top one was playing like major extensions. And then also there is my bass 6 as well through the 6505 too. Just to get a little extra chunk. All right, I'm going to play the AC30 through this loop, and I'm just going to bring the rest of the guitars in so you can kind of hear what each one is doing. All right, so we got body, we got energy now, we've got more noise. And the bass 6 is kind of just for a little extra oomph. One guitar by itself could not get that wall of sound on its own. Cool, so I want to show off one more example of this. Disappear by Doom Mutual. I'm going to play a second of it. This one is like super shoegazy, massive wall of sound, and there's a lot of layers in here between rhythms and leads that are kind of creating this soundscape. The same applies. We're going to start out with the first rhythm right here. It's going to be cleaner. Sounds kind of martially. bright. Now we've got the second rhythm, fuzzier, more noise, more energy. We got a baritone. It's only playing power chords. I'm pretty sure that's my bass 6. And then this one is very cool. Super clean, my high-strung guitar. So it's a guitar with like a 12-string set that my roommate Nick set up for me. And it's an octave up from a normal guitar. And that is the basis of the tones for this song. I'm going to pop them in one at a time. All right, here come the rhythm 2. There's the girth. Baritone. Bottom end. Extra oomph. And the jangle. It's pretty on top. Ethereal. And once you add the leads on top of that, you just get this whole soundscape and some feedback. So all of those tones work together to get us that massive sound. So let's hop in on my quad Cortex because it'll be a little bit easier to swap some stuff around. And then at the end, I'll pull up some plugins that I like and we'll mess around with some tones. All right, I've gone mobile really quick just to show you guys my tracking setup. I do have a couple of pedals. I'm using the quad Cortex to do all of my tones, and this is my signal chain. The pedals are very new. I've been using the quad for a minute now, but I come into the DI box that's right back here. So I can get my clean DI. That gets sent over to my split right there on channel 2. From the DI box, we hit the noise suppressor, this compressor, the double barrel, the rat. This one kind of gets swapped in and out. The cathedral, which I just got and I've been playing around with a bunch, to the EQ, and then to the quad. Now these honestly don't really get used that much unless I'm doing something that I feel like I really need them for. The quad is the main thing for the tone, and then that goes into input 3 and 4 on my Apollo, which is chained to the Quantum HD8, and that is how my signal gets routed. All right, so I have a little bit of a decent setup here where you can see the quad, the pedals, and then I have PreSonus pulled up. We're going to make a track. Let's call it Guitar Rhythm 1. I'm going to make 2 tracks. One's going to capture my DI, and the other one is going to capture the sound of the quad. This is going to be my DI track and my quad track. Now, when I'm tracking, I will set 2 of these up, one on the left, one on the right, but we're just going to do it one at a time now so that you can hear the difference of each of them. Now, I don't want to hear the DI, so I'm going to turn that down, and we're set up and ready to go. So the tone that I have pulled up right now is my twin. All it is the twin reverb on the quad, the Vox AC30 cabinet, and some EQ, a little bit of compression after the amp, and I've got some spring reverb before the amp. I find that putting a little bit of spring reverb before the amp helps the amp feel a little bit more natural, not too dry. And I've got a drive. This is an EQ doing a little bit. What is this? This is the Myth Drive, which is an emulation of the Klon Centaur, and that's basically the tone. This is the tone that you hear in all of my riff videos. This is my Rhythm 1 tone. It might have a little bit more grit before it, and it could be coming from a pedal. It could be coming from another pedal emulation on here. But that's how I dial in a tone like this. Let's actually just start from scratch. So I'm going to start out with an amp. We're going to pull up let's do the AC30 since I kind of talked about that. We go AC30. I'm going to pull up the cabinet for the AC30, 212 UK 65. This is what I like. Input 2 is where it's coming in at. Output 1 and 2 go to the UA. We're going to turn the output up on the cabinet. And we've started out with a clean tone. Now let's add a little bit of drive. Did I do the AC30? Yeah. Which one is it? Maybe it's the 15 top boost. Yes. Top boost, because we get a bass and treble control. All right. So super clean tone. Let's add a little bit of gain. Now, you kind of have to know a little bit about each amp. This one does not have a master section. It's got an output volume, which kind of acts as the master, but the more that we turn the volume knob up, the more gain we're going to get. And Voxes just have that super crisp top end that sounds kind of sizzly, which is what I like. And a tone cut that's kind of basically just like a high cut. I typically have that rolled all the way off. Now that's pretty good, but I want to boost into this amp a little bit. So let's add an overdrive. I'm going to go with the Myth Drive because I love it. It's really good for those crispy sounds. I want to turn the gain all the way down and the level all the way up because I'm not trying to get gain from this pedal. I'm trying to use this pedal to boost the amp even more. And now we've got a lot of sustain out of the tone. And a little bit of drive. If we want less drive, we can pull that level back down. And we've got a tone control on the front that we can use to give it a little extra sparkle if we want. Now, important to note that I am on the middle position on this guitar, and it has P90s. The cool thing about P90s is they're kind of like a middle ground between humbuckers and single coils. They've got a little bit more output. They're a little bit fatter, but they don't have that flat response of humbuckers. You can do the same thing with single coils. You just kind of have to boost the amp a little bit more. This is a great starting point. Another thing you can do is, let's say that you don't want to add drive, you just want to boost the amp a little bit. We can add some compression to the front of the amp. Now I'm getting a little bit of noise, so I'm going to turn on my gate. Now we've got a cleaner signal. It doesn't have as much gain hitting the amp, but it's still got all of the sustain. If it's got the same amount of sustain as if we used the drive, maybe even a little bit more. And we can turn that level down. Not as sizzly on the top. Remember, everything that you add in the chain is going to shape the tone in some way. Whatever you do before the amp isn't going to have nearly as much effect as if you add it after the amp. A very good example of that would be, let's just make some random EQ, and it's not going to sound good, but I'm going to just make a bunch of curves. We'll boost here, we'll cut here, and we'll boost the top end like that. Just something quick, okay? Now this is after the amp right here. Doesn't sound that bad. But if we were to move this EQ before the amp, because the amp is acting as our compressor and clamping those frequencies down, it's not going to have nearly as much of an effect on the tone as it would after the amp. right? It's not cutting those mids out as much. It's not boosting the low end as much. It's not boosting the top end as much. There's more hitting the amp, but the amp's pulling it down because it's squishing that signal down. And I'm going to put a little bit of spring reverb before the amp. We'll do mono since we're tracking in mono, and I'm going to turn this way down. If it's up too much, the amp again is going to compress it, and it's going to make that reverb way more accentuated than it needs to be. Say right there. And that would be a really good rhythm one tone for me. Let's talk about heavier tones now. Well, like my rhythm two would be, we're going to swap out of single coil pickups and we're going to grab something with some humbuckers in it. This is a Mexican Fender Strat. I play this thing all the time. It's got a Seymour Duncan humbucker in the bridge that's like super juiced. So it's got a way hotter output. A lot more sustain. We want to reach more for an amp that does more aggressive sounds, we should say. My go-to is always a 5150. So I'm going to grab a 5150, PV lead. We're going to grab cab. I typically go for like the Mesa, which I don't normally like Mesas, but on the quad, this Mesa 90s V30 tone is super sick. So this is what we're starting out with. And it's got a lot more noise. There's way less nuance. Like I can just hit a note and it'll hold for kind of as long as I want to hold it. So now, because we already have the sustain, we're looking at pedals more as flavor than as a means of squashing the sound down before it hits the amp. So here I would go for, on here, Tube Screamer type thing. Where is it? The green 808. Let's do that. This is like the typical sound. And again, I'm going to turn down the overdrive, turn up the level, and let's give it a little bit of top end. So now if we compare that to before without the pedal, what I notice is that without the pedal, it's a little more raw sounding. It's a little more spongy. It's got a little bit more low end. The pedal kind of controls the amp a little bit more, reins it in. Either of these would be a good starting point. And literally all this is a drive pedal, an amp, and a cabinet. Don't really need much more than that for a tone like this. Obviously, you'll want to EQ it afterwards, but that's really all that you need. Stacking those two things together, a cleaner tone and a heavier tone, will give you the clarity of the clean tone, the pick attack of the clean tone, the definition of the clean tone, with the energy, the noise, and the power of the heavier tone. A lot of people get caught up in like, I'm going to drop this thing onto here and this tone is going to be it, and it sounds weak. It doesn't sound full, because if you quad tracked your guitars, it would be so much fuller. There'd be a lot more frequencies to play with, a lot more balancing that you could do between the two. My cleaner tone typically ends up being way more open sounding, way brighter, way more bitey than my heavy tone. And that's intentional, so that all of the bite can come from the jangle of the top strings on the clean tone, then all of the power comes from the distorted tone. So that was a really basic look into how I dial in my tones. And obviously a lot of you guys at home don't have a quad or don't have all of these pedals or the guitars that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up on my DI track some amp sims that I use that I like, that you can have All right, so first let's talk about the clean tone, since that's kind of what we've started out with. I have pulled up STL Tonality Andy James. This is my ride or die plugin. I use this on everything. I did before I got my quad for literally everything. Any kind of guitar tone that you want to get, I feel like you can get out of this plugin. It is a little bit of money. I'll show you some free ones too after this. But this is the one that I know the best. I've also got my Strat. I feel like it's a pretty common guitar. It's got single coils. We're going to take a look at dialing in some tones with this now. I'm going to start in the middle position, middle pickup. So let's pop up to the high input. Gives it a little bit more body. And we're on amp 3, which is the AC30, and we're on cab 3, which is the AC30 cab emulation. Now, one control in every amp sim that a lot of people don't think about is this little guy right here, that input knob. That plays a huge role in the tone. If I roll this down, look how clean it is. I didn't touch the gain on the amp. Yeah, it is really quiet. So if we compensate for that, that's a terrible chord. Versus putting it back to the starting position. You can even clip into these plugins. That's a pretty good starting point, and I haven't really changed anything. Roll off a little bit of bass, boosted a little bit of treble. Look how little I did that. I didn't do anything. Let's play around with the pedal a little bit. We add some drive. Now we're starting to lose note definition, so I'm going to pull that back just a little bit and add a little bit of extra tone boost so that we get some spank from the strings. That sounds pretty good. If you double track something with that, let's do it really quick. Let's just loop that. Very weird time signature, but who cares? Now we're going to pan them left and right. They're also out of time because I couldn't hear the click while I was tracking those. So now that I'm hearing this, there's too much top end, there's too much hiss. I'm going to roll off some of that top end. Maybe we even use the tone cut a little bit. I'm going to bust those down, and we're going to add an EQ. Now, with tones like this, there's always going to be a little bit of hiss. So we're going to find that really quick. There it is. When you pull it out, you can really hear the mid-range start to open up. Obviously, we're not going to want to pull it out this much, maybe just a little bit. I'm going to go back to the 12 decibel view. I don't like EQing guitars in anything past the 12 decibel view in Pro Q. You can do this in any EQ plugin, but just don't over EQ. This is where it was. Pulled it out. Maybe a bit of top end just to get it to poke through a little bit more. Down here is also a pretty tough section of frequencies and guitar amps. Very easy for it to be too low end heavy, but the Vox in this plugin is really good at balancing it. That to me is a very, very good starting point. Let's talk about some heavy guitars. All right, so I just went ahead and made 2 new tracks. These black tracks right here are gonna be our heavy tone, while the red ones are gonna be the cleaner tone. I'm gonna bring the same plugin over to these 2. We're just gonna swap amps. Let me turn this on. We're gonna play a little bit. Let's go to the 5153 is pretty good. Oh, also, Les Paul, Seymour Duncan pickup. I'm using the bridge pickup. Something else that's kind of common, I feel like. But just something with humbuckers. I'm going to track something in. Good enough. That was way too loud. Even these back out. Okay, let's listen to them. All right, right off the bat, there's way too much gain. We've already got the attack, we've got the top end, we've got the brightness from the clean track, so we don't really need as much bite out of this. Presence is kind of nice, a little mid-range boost. Let's try some of these power tubes. KT88s, I like those. Again, you can play with that input knob and fine-tune the distortion. Sounds pretty good to me. Let's copy it over and hard pan them. Sounds pretty good. I mean, obviously the playing could be a little bit better and tighter. Now that we have both of them in, we want to compare them and see what aspects of each take we like, each tone that kind of works synonymously with the other. In the clean tone, there might be a little bit too much like Spider-Man, like that makes sense. Another thing, like with tones like this, you kind of just have to describe them as the sounds that you hear. That. And I think we can pull a little bit of low end out of the heavy guitars. Now I still hear a little bit of that Spider-Man like sound. So we're going to mute one and the other and see where it's coming from. Yeah, it's coming from the clean one still. We're going to do a wide band and pull a lot of this top end down. Actually, that's it right there. With this down, I think we can afford to put a little bit of this back in. And now I would bust those down, and then we can EQ them together. Lots of many different stages of EQ. We're gonna go sweeping for whistles. Here's one. Typically it's between 3K and like 4.2, and then there's also one at like 2K that I don't like. You see a lot of people boost and sweep to try to find, and once you find it, that's good. Let's say right there, we're gonna pull that down. But also, once you pull it down, take note of this frequency. So 2.6K, we're gonna sweep around once we've ducked it to see if we can make the sound any better if that frequency moves. I kind of like it a little bit better down here, right around 2K, like I was saying. Now that we've got that, I'll pull up some sort of like console EQ. A little bit of top end, maybe a little bit of bottom end. And some compression. I really like the API 2500 on guitars. I always go fast release, but sometimes I'll play with the attack knob just to see what it does to the tone. Sometimes the slowest attack time is a little bit too aggressive, so I'll pull it back. I like it right there. And then because, you know, because it is what it is, you know? And that is typically how I approach every guitar tone ever for any song that I work on. Sometimes there'll be more layers if I'm looking for something else. Like I'll use the high strung guitar to get more top end, more shimmer out of the guitar, or I'll throw a baritone on it if I want more oomph. Or sometimes it'll be the same thing where it's like a clean tone, then this gets copied over and the same thing gets played, but it's a higher gain tone, more of like a mid, like crunch tone. And then it's my high gain tone. It's just making these smaller moves to add up to what we get. Now, a couple of free plugins that you can use if you don't want to buy anything that I have found. There's one called, what is it? Shattered Glass Audio, the Ace plugin. This is a really good sort of like tweed amp. I'm going to play it over the AC30 so you can kind of hear it. You can turn the cabinet off and use IRs, which is awesome. There's no tone controls, which kind of sucks, but it does this fuzz thing that's really cool if you turn it all the way up and turn the feedback all the way down. It does that like super blown out fuzz thing, which is really cool. And this is a free plugin and it's definitely worth checking out. For the heavier tones, one that's pretty good, Lecto. Oh, I think I deleted it. For the heavier tones, we've got Emissary. This does not have a cabinet with it, but it comes with NAD IR, which comes with a bunch of free IRs. I have some of mine loaded up, but this is kind of what that sounds like. And I've used this on releases. It's a great plugin, especially for a free plugin. Just see what that sounds like stereo really quick. So those are a couple options if you don't want to spend money. There is so much that goes into making a good guitar tone, from your guitar selection to playing style, to the pickups in the guitar, to the amp, to the pedals before the amp, to the cabinet, to the mic selection, whether you're using plugins and emulating all of those things. There's so much. This was kind of just like a really quick dive into my process. We kind of just lightly touched on everything very sparsely. Didn't really talk much about EQ other than just like sweeping out resonances. You know, EQ before an amp makes a huge difference on the tone and how the amp responds to the tone hitting it. Reverb and delay before an amp is going to respond very differently than reverb and delay after an amp. If you put reverb and delay before you hit your amp and it's a really high gain tone, it's going to like clip and be all weird. And that's cool for some things. It's not really cool for other things. Versus it in an effects loop or after an amp. Using IRs with amp sims makes a huge difference because a lot of the time the IRs that come with the amp sims aren't really the best that they can be. It also gives you a lot more flexibility on the tone. And with plugins comes the inevitable problem of them sounding digital. I would argue that the quad sounds better sometimes than an amp, but definitely better than plugins for the most part, just because plugins to me, for some reason, have this sort of digital harshness to them that is very, very hard to get out unless you're using more analog things like pedals to kind of compensate for that. And for everybody out there in their bedroom with a 2i2, I hate to break it to you, but the 2i2's converters are good. I mean, the 4th gen sound like they're amazing and much better than the 1st gen, which is what I started out with. But an interface with good converters makes a huge difference. I remember when I first switched to my Apollo and I plugged in a bass, listening to the low end response on a bass DI coming from my 18i8 to the Apollo was like insane. Using a DI box versus plugging straight into your Focusrite, that makes a difference also. There's so many different things, and these are things that I love talking about. I'm such a nerd about, and I want to go down the rabbit hole and discuss all of these things further. So this is probably going to turn into a series where it's like, today we're going to look at miking amps or building pedal boards and running them into plugins to see if that affects how digital they sound, or making IRs, or comparing, you know, there's endless possibilities for this. I love talking about guitar tones. I love making videos about guitar tones. So this is something that I want to do. And if you guys have any questions, definitely let me know. Leave them in the comments, DM me on Instagram. I would love to do some experimenting to answer your questions for you, but also for me. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys. If there's anything that you want to know, anything you want me to try, I have so many things here that I'm like really grateful to have. I want to find out everything. I want to know everything there is to know. This is something that I'm really passionate about, and it's something that a lot of people have asked me about. So I hope that this was helpful, and I'm looking forward to making more videos like this. Leave a like, subscribe, blah, 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 all of that dumb stuff. You know what to do. But anyway, thanks for watching, and keep riffing, and I'll catch you in the next video.